My husband had an affair. However, I did not divorce him. Instead, over the next 3 years, I gave birth to 2 children back to back. It was only when his mistress personally came to mock me that people realized this entire situation was a product of my meticulous calculation. The reason I did not divorce my husband after discovering his infidelity was not out of generosity, nor was it because I was foolish enough to believe a man's belated vows. I remained with the Harrington family, giving them a son and a daughter, and lived peacefully for 4 years, as Julian Harrington's wife in name only. Others mocked me, saying I was swallowing my pride, or criticized me for being blinded by money. Those with sharp tongues whispered that I was using my children to shackle a man whose heart had already left me. I listened to all those words but never offered a single excuse. There is no need to loudly prove to the world whether you are truly living well or not. Then came the day of my daughter's first birthday gala. A woman in a white dress walked into the banquet hall with bloodshot eyes. She looked pitiful, acting as though the entire world owed her an apology. Her name was Vanessa, my husband's longtime mistress. That day, the Harrington family had rented out the entire grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers gleamed dazzlingly from the high ceilings, and the entrance was covered in white orchids and cream roses. Outside, a line of luxury sedans and town cars stopped along the red carpet. The guests included not only relatives from both sides, but also major partners, shareholders, Wall Street bank executives, real estate tycoons, and media moguls. Everyone knew that calling it a first birthday party was just an excuse. It was essentially a networking event to solidify the Harrington corporate empire. I was wearing a deep navy silk gown adorned with pearls, my hair elegantly swept up, holding my newly turned 1-year-old daughter, Beatrice. Unusually quiet that day, the child rested her plump cheek against my shoulder, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Not far away, my husband Julian stood next to my father-in-law, smiling and conversing with elderly VIP guests. He was just as handsome and tall as the day I first met him, with broad shoulders and a bright face. It was a smile warm enough to plant the belief in people's minds that he was a good husband and a loving father. If I had not known the truth hidden behind that smile, perhaps even I would have believed it. The moment Vanessa appeared at the grand doors, a suffocating silence swept through the ballroom. She had no companion, holding only a small clutch bag, her hair hanging loose, and her makeup intentionally light to make her look haggard. She stood there silently, staring straight at Julian. That gaze was far too clear and far too familiar. It was not the look of a guest coming to celebrate. It was the look of a woman coming to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. Whispers began to erupt behind me. "Oh my God, isn't that the woman Executive VP Harrington has been seeing on the side? I heard rumors it had been going on for a while, but I never thought she would crash his daughter's first birthday. Eleanor is so pitiful. She knew exactly what her husband was doing, but still had 2 kids back to back, probably terrified of losing her spot as the Harrington daughter-in-law. What is there to pity? She came from nothing, an orphan with no connections, and hit the jackpot with Julian. Even if he cheats, she has to grit her teeth and bear it. I think she is brilliant. She gave the Harrington family a son and a daughter, so who could ever kick her out now?" I turned my head and looked at the women who had just been gossiping. They shut their mouths instantly. One quickly lowered her gaze to her wineglass, while the other forced a stiff smile. They were all wives and daughters of executives from Harrington Enterprises or its subsidiaries. They had the courage to badmouth me, but they lacked the courage to look me in the eye. I offered them a light smile. Their faces grew even paler. Today, I had no intention of making anyone uncomfortable. I did not want to ruin the atmosphere of my daughter's celebration with garbage talk. Julian spotted Vanessa, too. In a split second, the color drained from his face. Deep displeasure was evident between his furrowed brows. He strode over to me and lowered his voice. "Eleanor, I had no idea she would come here." I looked at him once, and then gazed down at the sleeping daughter in my arms. "I know. I will handle it." As he tried to step forward, I lightly grabbed his sleeve. "You stay here and attend to the guests. Your father and mother have invited many VIPs, and it is not good for you to leave your post right now." Julian stared at me blankly for a moment, as if he never expected me to be this calm, but he did not object. I handed my daughter over to a nearby nanny, smoothed out the hem of my gown, picked up a glass of champagne from a service table, and slowly walked toward Vanessa. She glared at me with eyes mixed with hatred and contempt. He handed her the champagne glass. "Vanessa, there are a lot of eyes watching us here. If you have something to say, let us go to the VIP lounge." She did not take the glass, keeping her eyes fixed solely on Julian, who stood behind me. Isahil, stop looking. He is not going to follow you today. If he abandons his daughter's first birthday party to walk out holding his mistress's hand, the Harrington family will be the laughingstock of Manhattan by tomorrow morning. You know, he would never do that. Vanessa bit her lip. My words must have hit the mark. A few seconds later, with a cold face, she followed me into a small VIP lounge at the back of the ballroom. As soon as the door closed, she roughly swatted my hand away, as if she had touched a filthy bug. When are you going to drop this elegant act? I placed the champagne glass on a table, sat on the sofa, and looked at her calmly. Did you come all the way to my daughter's birthday party just to ask me that? Vanessa scoffed, her eyes welling with tears. You must be so proud of your daughter. Do you not feel pathetic, desperately popping out kids just to keep your seat as the Harrington daughter-in-law, even when you know Julian does not love you anymore? I was not angry. I just found it slightly amusing. She was looking at me as if I were a deeply miserable woman. Perhaps in her mind, I had to be the pitiful, long-suffering wife, shedding tears day and night in that massive Greenwich estate, clinging to my 2 children, and waiting for my husband to return. Meanwhile, she seemed firmly convinced that she, whom Julian visited in the dark, was the true victor holding real love. Vanessa pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and shoved it in my face. Look at this. I glanced at the screen out of the corner of my eye. It was a video taken inside a luxury apartment. Dim lighting, low laughter, and Julian's silhouette clearly showing the watch he had worn out last night. Vanessa stared piercingly into my face, fully expecting me to crumble. He was at my place yesterday, all night long, and he woke up in my bed this morning to come to your daughter's birthday party. Do you understand now? The man you call your husband does not have a single speck of room for you in his heart. I remained silent for a few seconds. Not because it hurt. It was out of bewilderment as to why a man nearing 40 would leave such sloppy, easily traceable evidence trailing behind him. I lifted my head and looked at Vanessa. Did you come all the way here just to show me this? She faltered. Does it not hurt you? Hurt? I repeated the word briefly and burst into laughter. Vanessa, this is not the first or second time I have seen a video like this. The color of her face drastically changed. I leaned back against the sofa and spoke in a very low voice. In the beginning of our marriage, yes, it hurt. I cried, threw things, and clung to him, asking why he was doing this to me. But a person does not hover between life and death every time they are stabbed by the same knife. The first time you get stabbed, it aches down to the bone. The second time, you grow numb. By the 100th time, it just becomes an annoyance. Vanessa gripped her phone tightly. I know you were just talking like that to act tough. The more composed you act, the more it proves you are terrified of losing him. I slowly scanned her from head to toe. The white dress she wore was tailored, but the stitching at the waistline was slightly crooked. Her shoes were new, but they were not designer. The clutch bag she held was the kind of item Julian casually bought to appease the new women he met. Expensive enough to make the receiver mistakenly feel loved, and cheap enough that the giver did not have to care. Such a perfectly mediocre item. I slowly opened my mouth. Do you think I had children to hold on to Julian? When I gave birth to my firstborn, Harrison, my parents-in-law transferred 15% of Harrington Enterprises shares into my name. With the annual dividends alone, I can live a life of overflowing luxury for the rest of my days. When I had Beatrice last year, my mother-in-law gifted me a luxury chalet in Aspen, a prime commercial building in Soho, and a flawless sapphire and diamond suite worth tens of millions of dollars. Vanessa's face hardened like stone. I looked her straight in the eye and smiled. If having more money than I could ever spend makes me miserable, then yes, my children and I are truly miserable. She opened her mouth but could not say a word. I stood up from my seat and stepped closer to her. Vanessa, let me ask you honestly, how many years have you been trailing after Julian? She bit her lip hard. I answered for her. At least 3 years. What do you have left to show for those 3 years? Your own apartment? Your own car? Or a solid bank account balance? Or perhaps the right to confidently introduce yourself to his parents? Vanessa's eyes grew redder. I knew I had accurately struck her wound. You might delude yourself into thinking you have won because you had him for a few nights, but I have absolute legal justification. 2 children bearing the Harrington name, corporate shares, massive real estate assets, and the right to confidently walk into the corporate boardroom. Aside from the trashy promises a man spits out when he is in a good mood, what exactly do you have? Shut your mouth. Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking. Julian loves me. He told me he would divorce you if I just waited a little longer. He asked me to wait because he did not want to make my child an illegitimate one. He is just suffocated by his family. I stared at her silently for a long time. Suddenly, I remembered myself from years ago. There was a time when I, too, believed in Julian's eyes, mistakenly thought that he would turn his back on the whole world for me, and naively believed that if the love was deep enough, all betrayals were merely momentary mistakes. But the one way I was luckier than Vanessa was that I snapped out of it in time. I spoke. Do you know what the funniest part is? A man like Julian is not afraid of hurting a woman. He is only afraid of the moment a woman no longer needs him. Vanessa trembled violently as she looked at me. I walked toward the door. You probably wanted to make me jealous, but you failed. You wanted to humiliate me in front of the guests, but you failed at that too. It would be best for you to leave before this reaches my mother-in-law's ears. She is not as polite as I am. Just as I placed my hand on the doorknob, Vanessa suddenly burst into laughter behind me. The sound was bizarre. It was a strange mix of rage and a sense of triumph. Eleanor, you think you have won, do you not? I turned my head. Tears were clinging to Vanessa's eyelashes, but the corners of her mouth were twisted up in a cruel smirk. You just said you do not love him anymore, right? You said you only need the money, the shares, and the status. Is that not right? At that exact moment, I realized the door behind me had been slightly cracked open at some point, and standing outside that door was Julian. His face was as white as a sheet of paper, and he was looking at me with eyes that seemed to have just uncovered the most horrifying secret of his life. Vanessa ran toward him, crying out in a trembling voice. Did you hear that? She does not love you. She only used you to secure her place in the Harrington family. I looked at Julian once and then back at Vanessa. For some reason, I did not feel a single ounce of panic in my heart. Instead, a very deep, toxic fatigue washed over me. After all these long years, the man who had brutally butchered my love with his own hands was now looking at me with agonizing eyes, silently asking why I did not love him anymore. What a complete joke. Julian stood frozen outside the door. His hand gripping the doorknob was stiff, and his eyes were steadily turning bloodshot. I had seen him furious, I had seen him drunk, and I had seen him clutching my legs and begging for forgiveness when his betrayals were caught. But this was the first time he had ever looked at me with this kind of gaze. It was the look of a victim who had been thoroughly deceived his entire life. Vanessa clung to his arm and spoke in a trembling yet triumphant voice. You see, she never loved you. She only loved your money and the Harrington title. How much longer are you going to keep a woman like that by your side? Julian did not even glance at Vanessa. He stared only at me. Eleanor, was everything you just said the absolute truth? I let out a light laugh. It was a very faint smile, but inside the closed room it flashed as sharp as a blade. Which words are you hoping are true? The part where I said I no longer love you, or the part where I am only staying for the children, the shares, and the assets? His face turned blue. You loved me. I certainly did in the past. I cut him off firmly. That short sentence seemed to slam the breath right out of Julian's throat. He stepped into the room and roughly shook off Vanessa's hand. Stumbling and nearly falling, the triumph on Vanessa's face shattered into pieces. Shut up. His voice was so low and cold that Vanessa froze completely. She looked as if she could not believe that the man who had held her in his apartment last night could use such a tone with her in front of me. Julian clenched his fists and stared piercingly into my eyes, desperately trying to find a single trace of jealousy, a shred of pain, or the ghost of the wife who used to love him to the point of losing her reason. But I did not give him what he wanted. I smoothed out the sleeves of my dress and spoke calmly. The birthday gala is not over yet, and your father and mother are waiting outside. Do you want to broadcast our family's dirty laundry to the entire hotel? Is your reputation all that matters to you? No, my daughter matters to me. I looked him dead in the eye. Today is Beatrice's first birthday. My daughter has done nothing wrong to deserve having her first birthday turn into a tragic comedy, just because her father could not manage a woman he meets on the side. The muscles in Julian's face twitched. It was clear those words caused him agony, but I no longer had the energy to stroke his pathetic ego. Vanessa suddenly burst into tears. Do not act so high and mighty like you are something special. If you really do not need him, why will you not divorce him? Why are you shamelessly holding on to the position of the legal wife? Do you know how long I have waited? Do you know how much of my precious youth I have sacrificed for this man? I turned back to her. Did I steal your youth? She was rendered speechless. The one who made promises to you was Julian. The one who went to your bed was Julian. And the one who left you waiting in the dark was Julian. You do not have the courage to confront the man who did this to you, So you crawl in here and try to tear me apart instead. Vanessa, you are not pitiful because you loved the wrong person. You are pitiful because you still lack the courage to face the truth. Stop it, Julian said in a hoarse voice. I nodded. Yes, let us stop. Take this woman away. If she keeps sobbing and screaming like this and some ugly incident happens here, she will just blame the Harrington family for it anyway. As I finished speaking, a suffocating silence enveloped the room. Julian stared at me without blinking. Perhaps he was waiting for me to get angry, to hold on to him, or to at least slap Vanessa across the face. At the very least, he expected me to demand whether he really was with her last night. But I was just exhausted. So incredibly exhausted. I was sick and tired of even standing between two people on a third-rate stage, where I had already memorized all the lines. I tried to walk past Julian and return to the ballroom, but suddenly, he snatched my wrist. His grip was so strong that I furrowed my brow. Let go. Do you really want me to take this woman and leave? What else then? Shall I call the security guards and have her dragged out in front of all the guests? Eleanor, have you never once considered that I might be in pain? I looked down at his hand gripping my wrist and then looked back up at his face. Then, when I found lipstick and women's stockings under the passenger seat of your car, did you ever consider that I might be in pain? He turned as stiff as stone. When you kneeled in front of our bedroom door begging for forgiveness, and then rolled around in bed with another woman a few months later, did you never consider that I might be in pain then? I pulled my hand away and spat out each word slowly. Julian Harrington. My love is not some cheap object that you can trample when you want to trample it, and pick back up when you feel like it. It is already dead. I buried it with my own two hands. Vanessa was crying silently in the corner, and Julian crumbled as if someone had drained every ounce of energy from his body. I did not wait for his response. I opened the door and walked out. Outside the ballroom, the brilliant lights still shone brightly, and the sounds of guests laughing and conversing echoed through the air. My daughter was still sleeping soundly in the nanny's arms. I took a deep breath, raised the corners of my mouth, and transformed back into the perfect Harrington daughter-in-law. To our viewers listening to this story, if you wish to support the channel, please hit like and subscribe. We wish health and peace to all who are listening. When I took my daughter back from the nanny, my mother-in-law, Margaret Harrington, approached me. She cast a deep, cold glance toward the closed VIP room door behind me. Is it all handled? I pulled Beatrice a little closer to my chest. Yes. It is taken care of for now, Margaret. My mother-in-law gazed at me quietly, then reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. You endure entirely too much. I lowered my gaze and smiled faintly. It is fine, Margaret. I have grown used to it. But at those words, my mother-in-law's hand paused in mid-air. Her hand lingered near my temple for quite a long time. She did not say anything else, just staring at me intently. It was a look I rarely saw from her. It was not sympathy, nor was it ordinary pity. It was the expression an old woman who had weathered fierce storms alone makes when she discovers another woman standing tall, silently swallowing the storm right in front of her eyes. Eleanor, come up to my suite after the party is over. I nodded. Yes, ma'am. Margaret maintained her usual elegant, icy demeanor and turned to greet the guests. But I knew she had seen right through everything. Women who have been betrayed share a bizarre instinct. With just a passing glance, they know exactly how deeply the other is wounded, and how fiercely they are enduring the pain as they stitch up their own wounds to keep from collapsing. I held Beatrice and made a round of greetings to the guests. The baby woke up, rubbed her eyes, and clutched my collar with her tiny hand. Just then, my 3-year-old son, Harrison, came running from the kids' room. His white shirt was wrinkled and his hair was messy, but he was smiling radiantly. Mommy, did Beatrice wake up? Can I give her a kiss? I bent down so my son could kiss his sister's cheek. Harrison's eyes were the spitting image of Julian's, but his smile was transparent and unguarded, just like mine when I was young. Every time I looked at my children, I made a promise to myself. No matter how rotten and decayed this marriage was, I would protect the cleanest, clearest sky in the world for my 2 children. But adults always mistakenly believe they are hiding everything perfectly. As the party neared its end, Julian returned to the ballroom. Vanessa was no longer by his side. His suit jacket was rumpled and his complexion was ashen, but he was forcing a smile in front of the guests. He approached me and reached out to hold Beatrice. I shifted my body very subtly to avoid him. The movement was so slight that others would have hardly noticed, but Julian caught it instantly. His hands paused in the air, then dropped lifelessly to his sides. Oblivious to everything, Harrison ran up and hugged his father's legs. "Daddy, where did you go? I was looking for you earlier." Julian bent down, scooped Harrison up, and spoke in a soft voice. "Daddy had some business to take care of." "Did Harrison play nicely today?" "I played great, but Mommy said she is very tired. Daddy needs to give Mommy a lot of love." At the child's innocent words, both Julian and I shut our mouths simultaneously. He looked at me with reddened eyes. I turned my head away first. When flawlessly pure words from a child's mouth fall into the hearts of adults, they sting like salt on a wound. It was nearing 10 o'clock, and the gala concluded. Guests left one by one. The flowers wilted, the glasses were empty, and the glamorous laughter vanished down the elevators. I handed the 2 children to the nanny to send them ahead to the Greenwich estate, and I went up to the private suite on the upper floor of the hotel, where my mother-in-law had called for me. Margaret Harrington was sitting by the window, and in front of her sat a red velvet jewelry box. As I walked in, she pushed the box toward me. "Open it." Inside lay a breathtakingly brilliant, historic sapphire and diamond suite. The deep, icy blue hue of the stones made it immediately clear that this was not something one could easily acquire just by throwing money around. I closed the box. "Margaret, this is far too precious. I cannot accept this. It is not a gift. It is compensation." I lifted my head and looked at her. She was smiling faintly, but there was no joy in her smile. "I know you are not the type to be swayed by jewels. But today, Julian allowing such a vulgar woman to step foot into my granddaughter's birthday party was a slap in the face to me and a stain on the Harrington family name. This item is not meant to pacify you. It is meant to show you that, at the very least, within this family, I know perfectly well who is right and who is wrong." My throat grew hot. I had prepared countless polite words of refusal, but only one sentence escaped my lips. "Thank you, Margaret." She stared at me for a long time before asking slowly, "Do you still love that boy?" The room was so quiet that the steady hum of the air conditioner from the ceiling was all that could be heard. I did not avoid her gaze. "No." She nodded slightly, without any sign of surprise. "Then how do you plan to live from now on?" I pressed my hand firmly against the lid of the jewelry box. "Until I can stand solidly on my own 2 feet without leaning on the Harrington family. Until my 2 children secure firm positions that no one can shake, so that if the day ever comes when I must leave this house, I will never be kicked out onto the street empty-handed with my children." My mother-in-law's eyes trembled minutely. After a long pause, she spoke. "Come into the corporate headquarters tomorrow. I am putting you in charge of the South Boston Seaport Redevelopment Project. If you handle that properly, the board of directors will no longer treat you merely as Julian Harrington's wife." I snapped my head up. I was well aware of that project. It was one of Harrington Enterprises' most massive undertakings for the next 3 years, requiring billions of dollars in capital. "Do you trust me?" She stood up and approached me. Her eyes grew fierce. "I do not trust women who only know how to whine and cry. But I do trust a woman who, even after being betrayed, stands tall, keeps a clear mind, and protects her children and the dignity of the family." Suddenly, the door to the suite swung wide open. I had no idea how long he had been standing outside, but Julian was there, breathing heavily. He was still in the same dark suit, and heavy dark circles rested under his eyes from sleep deprivation. His gaze lingered on the jewelry box under my hand, then shifted to his mother. "Mother, are you bringing Eleanor into the corporate group?" Margaret replied coldly. "I am not bringing her in. I have already decided." Julian scoffed as he walked into the room. "This woman is my wife. She is not the heir to the company." My mother-in-law glared at him, dropping words as heavy as boulders. "Then start acting like an heir." The color instantly drained from Julian's face. Standing between mother and son, I had a premonition that my life after tonight would never return to what it was. At my mother-in-law's words, the room fell silent, as if cold water had been thrown over it. Julian stood as if his soul had left his body, both fists clenched tight. Born as the only son of the Harrington family, he was used to everyone yielding to him, and had grown up hearing only praise. This was likely the first time he had heard his own mother blatantly tell him he was unqualified to be the heir. "What do you mean by that?" His voice cracked. Margaret did not look away. "My meaning is perfectly clear. Look at the state of yourself. You handle company affairs superficially. You ruin every major project you touch. Your household is a complete disaster. And you let the tramp you meet on the side crash your daughter's birthday party to cause a scene. If Eleanor had not stepped up to save face today, can you even imagine how the media would have torn Harrington Enterprises apart by tomorrow morning?" Julian shot a glaring look at me. It was a gaze mixed with rage and a sense of unfairness. So you are pushing Eleanor into the company to replace me? Who said anything about replacing you? You kicked your own seat away. I stood still, not interjecting. This battle was never mine to begin with, but my mother-in-law's words were acting as an invisible hand, pushing me through a new door. No matter how hard I had tried, people had always treated me merely as a lucky orphan who married into a billionaire family. That was the closed door. Julian let out a distorted laugh. Eleanor, do you think so too? Do you want to come into the company and steal everything that is mine? I looked at him. My heart was bizarrely calm. I do not need to steal anything. Everything I have was either given to me willingly by your parents or built by my own hands. I am your wife, but I am not your shadow. Julian's face darkened. He approached me and lowered his voice. You have changed. I smiled faintly. No. You just never bothered to truly look at me until now. He was left speechless. Perhaps in his memory, I would forever remain a poor college student. The naive girl who blushed at his first bouquet of flowers, walked down Fifth Avenue holding his hand with trembling fingers, and believed that if two people truly loved each other, they could overcome any difference in background. He did not realize that that woman had already died inside a tightly locked room 4 years ago. On the exact day I found lipstick and a stranger's stockings under the passenger seat of his car, my mother-in-law picked up her handbag and coldly declared, "This matter is already decided. Tomorrow, Eleanor will report to headquarters for the handover. And instead of whining about your bruised ego, use that time to prove your own worth. Stop screaming in here like a toddler who got his toy taken away." With those words, she walked straight out the door. Only Julian and I were left in the room. He stared at me for a long time, his eyes showing a surprisingly softened look. Eleanor, do you know how angry I was when Vanessa came here today? I swear it was not my doing. I never wanted her to put you in a difficult position. I closed the jewelry box and pulled it close to my chest. Whether you wanted it or not, it happened. That is the point. I will handle it. Truly. Hearing those words, a chuckle escaped my lips. You have said that before. I mean it this time. I raised my head and looked at him. Julian, do you know what disgusts me most about you? It is not the fact that you cheated. It is the arrogance of thinking that after betraying me time and time again, all it takes is the phrase, "I mean it this time," for me to foolishly trust you again. He stepped closer and tried to grab my hand. I stepped back, and at that reaction, he froze in place. Am I that terrifying to you? It is not that you are terrifying. I just do not want to be touched. His eyes grew red. Am I that filthy? I remained silent. That silence was the most brutal answer of all. Julian's face contorted as if he had been slapped hard across the face. He turned around, swept his hand through his hair, and breathed heavily. After a moment, he suddenly let out a hollow laugh and said, "Fine. If you want to come into the company, come. I will watch with my own 2 eyes to see exactly how far you can go." I nodded. Good. Watch closely. The next morning, I dressed in a cream-colored tailored suit and drove myself to the Harrington Enterprises headquarters on Wall Street. As I entered the lobby, countless eyes poured over me. Some gave me a respectful nod, while others whispered behind my back. It was obvious what they were thinking. In their eyes, I was still just a trophy wife, a nepotism hire who secured a spot thanks to giving birth to the eldest grandson. I didn't bother making excuses. Sometimes in this world, overwhelming results serve as a much clearer answer than lengthy justifications. The first meeting was at 9 in the morning. The South Boston redevelopment project was completely stalled. The budget was skyrocketing due to land compensation issues. Contractors were applying pressure, and the existing executive team was busy passing the buck. As I entered the conference room, several executives shot me thinly veiled looks of condescension. Executive VP Sullivan, a man in his mid-50s, opened his mouth with a practiced, corporate smile. "Mrs. Harrington, since it is your first day, you must still be getting a grasp on the operations. For today, we will provide a general briefing, and you can take your time learning the technical details." I dropped the binder I was holding onto the desk with a sharp thud, looking straight at him. I do not need a general briefing. 3 years of reports, contract appendices, city council meeting minutes, and the itemized lists of additional costs. I reviewed all of them last night. The biggest irregularity right now is that the urban planning consulting fees have been inflated by nearly $3 million. I want to hear a satisfactory explanation in this room, right now. An instant silence flowed through the conference room. The smile hanging on Sullivan's face froze solid. In that moment, they must have realized I was not here to be a mere figurehead. VP Sullivan was stagnant water, a man who had worked under the previous chairman for over 20 years. He was used to throwing his weight around to crush subordinates, and he probably viewed the young daughter-in-law as a joke, a woman who should just dress pretty, raise kids, and enjoy a life of luxury. But the moment the number 30 million flew out of my mouth, his smile completely evaporated. Mrs. Harrington, it is highly inappropriate for you to speak so rashly about the project's financial matters. Those fees were already approved through standard procedures. I opened the binder, pulled out copies of the contract details, and spread them across the table. On paper, it was standard procedure. But the exact same consulting firm charged Harrington 37% more for the exact same line items than they quoted a partner firm in Miami. I already had someone look into it. It turns out the registered co-founder of that consulting firm is none other than your brother-in-law, VP Sullivan. Would you like to keep talking here? Or would you prefer to speak to the internal audit department later? It felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Someone buried their head, flipping mindlessly through papers. Someone else coughed and drank water, but no one dared make eye contact with me. Red in the face, Sullivan's hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table. Are you accusing me of embezzlement on your very first day, Mrs. Harrington? I looked at him without wavering. I am not accusing you. I am giving you one last chance to explain yourself before this matter is handed over to the legal department. He slammed his hand on the table with a loud bang. Are you planning to purge the veterans on your first day? Do you think you can just swing your sword around blindly just because you have the chairman's backing as his daughter-in-law? I replied calmly without raising my voice. You are mistaken. If I were relying solely on my status as a daughter-in-law, I would not have been up until 3 a.m. reading every single word of these contracts. I am here to save this project that you people are dragging into the mud. Just then, the conference room doors swung open. I do not know how long he had been standing there, but Julian walked in, wearing the same dark suit from the day before. With hollow eyes from lack of sleep, he swept his gaze across the room and finally looked at me. I thought he was going to defend the old guard and block my path. However, he spoke in a cold voice. Continue the meeting. VP Sullivan desperately cried out, as if grabbing for a lifeline. Julian, please look at this. On her very first day, your wife is making unreasonable. Julian cut him off. I said, continue the meeting. I am not here to listen to your excuses, Sullivan. Sullivan was left speechless. I was a bit surprised internally, but I did not let it show on the outside. The meeting lasted for nearly 3 hours. I ordered an immediate halt to the abnormal execution of funds, mandated the formation of an independent task force, and demanded a complete revision of the compensation packages for the South Boston residents to end the exhausting conflicts. My proposals were not magically brilliant, but they were extremely pragmatic and razor-sharp. It was enough to force the executives who had ignored me to sit up straight and pay attention. After the meeting ended, Julian followed me into the hallway. When did you prepare all those files? I haven't slept a wink since your mother assigned me the project last night. He remained silent for a few seconds, his voice noticeably softer. In the past, when I asked you to join the company, you said no. If you had agreed back then, maybe I stopped walking and looked at him. There are no maybes. I didn't join back then because I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. I didn't want to hear for the rest of my life that I was riding my husband's coattails. And the reason I joined now is because I have to protect what belongs to my children. Julian had nothing to say. I did not wait for his response and stepped onto the elevator. The reflection of my face on the cold metal doors looked utterly indifferent, but my heart was beating wildly inside my chest. It wasn't out of fear. It was because I knew that from today, the people trying to trample me wouldn't just be my husband's mistresses, but also the cunning old foxes inside this massive corporate empire. To our viewers listening to this story, if you wish to support the channel, please hit like and subscribe. We wish health and peace to all who are listening. 3 weeks later, the South Boston project slowly began to regain momentum. I personally went down to the site, met with the displaced residents, and listened to their lives, the historic homes, family businesses, and community roots that the reports had coldly labeled merely as demolition sites. I realized that money alone could not push people out. I increased the relocation compensation funds, established a job training foundation for affected families, and simultaneously cut out all the meaningless middleman margins. Initial projected profits dipped, but the agonizing lawsuits and the risk of project delays vanished along with them. Upon receiving the report, My mother-in-law said only one thing: keep going. To others, it was an ordinary remark, but to me, it was total validation. Returning home late that night, both children were already asleep. Just as I changed my clothes, my phone screen lit up. An unknown number had sent a photo. It showed Julian sitting side by side with a young, beautiful woman in a red dress at a high-end lounge bar in Manhattan. The woman's face was full of a provocative smile. Below the photo was a message: "Do you think you've won? Can you really keep a man like Julian forever?" I stared at the photo for a few seconds before deleting it. I didn't even have the energy to be jealous. However, just as I was about to put the phone down, a second message arrived. The woman he picked this time isn't the type to back down easily. What are you going to do? I furrowed my brow. It wasn't because of the woman in the red dress. It was because of the watch on Julian's wrist in the photo. It was the couple's watch I had gifted him on our first anniversary. He had worn that watch, the one he hadn't worn once in the past 4 years, keeping it boxed away right out in the open while sitting with another woman. In an instant, I realized Julian wasn't just having an affair. He was intentionally clawing at the gaps in my memory, trying to hurt me, trying to make me jealous to force me into proving that I still loved him. I turned off my phone and went to Harrison's room. Sleeping soundly, the child was clutching the edge of his blanket, calling for his mom in his sleep. Sitting beside him, I felt my chest run cold. If Julian wanted to continue his shallow games of using women to test my feelings, I could easily brush it off, but I swore to myself that the day his filthy games touched the flawless world of my children, I would not show a single ounce of mercy. Following the day I received the lounge bar photo, Julian started coming home more frequently. However, his presence did not warm the massive Greenwich estate. Instead, the air in the house grew heavier, as if cold frost had settled into every corner. He no longer made excuses about Vanessa, and he didn't bring up the woman in the red dress from the photo. He simply appeared quietly at dinner time, sat across from me, put food on Harrison's plate, held Beatrice, and stared at me with a bizarrely irritating gaze. One evening, Harrison was assembling a toy robot on the living room rug. Sitting nearby, Julian suddenly asked, "What event is happening at your school this weekend?" Harrison snapped his head up, eyes sparkling. "Family picnic day. The teacher said Mommy and Daddy have to come together." Julian looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I wiped Beatrice's mouth and answered calmly, "I posted the schedule in the family group chat. Whether you read it or not is your choice." He was silent for a moment before saying, "I'll be there." Harrison cheered and hugged his dad's neck. "Really? Daddy, you can't forget your promise." Julian flinched, then hugged his son tighter. "I won't forget." Watching that scene, my heart didn't feel a single ripple. I just hoped that, for once, he would play the role of a proper father. As long as he didn't drag his cheap adult testing games into a child's transparent world, that is, but I gave him too much credit. On Saturday morning, I took Harrison to his private prep school in Manhattan. The field was decorated with blue and white balloons, and the laughter of children echoed everywhere as parents arrived one by one. Wearing his athletic uniform, Harrison stood on his tiptoes every few minutes, craning his neck toward the school gates. "When are Mommy and Daddy coming?" Daddy said he was coming for sure, so he must be on his way. No sooner had I finished my sentence than a silver sports car pulled up to the gates. Julian got out first. Wearing a white polo shirt and chinos, he looked every bit the young, successful father who could instantly capture the attention of the other mothers. However, the moment the passenger door opened, the smile hovering on my lips froze cold. A young woman stepped out. It wasn't Vanessa, nor was it the woman in the red dress from the lounge bar photo. Wearing a tennis skirt, her hair tied up high, and sporting bright makeup, the woman held a small gift bag in her hand. She walked up, clinging tightly to Julian's side. Even without an introduction, anyone could tell their relationship was far from innocent. Innocent little Harrison ran toward his father. "Daddy!" Julian bent down, scooped his son up, and smiled naturally. "Daddy's here." The woman next to him tilted her head at Harrison and gave a bubbly smile. "Hi, you must be Harrison. You're much cuter in person than in your photos." I took a long stride forward. My voice dropped to freezing temperatures. "Who are you?" Without a hint of panic, the woman replied, "I'm Chloe. You can just call me Chloe. I came with Julian today to cheer for Harrison." I glared at Julian. "This is my child's family event. Why did you bring this woman here?" Julian shrugged, trying to act nonchalant, but his eyes darted around, busy analyzing my reaction. "Chloe loves kids, and she said she wanted to watch the field day, so I brought her. We'll just watch from the sidelines, so so don't act so sensitive. Anger surged up, suffocating me, but I kept my voice as low as possible. Julian Harrington, I don't care what kind of garbage stunts you pull outside. But this is my child's school. Do you not know what a boundary is? Chloe suddenly let out a little laugh. Eleanor, don't misunderstand. Julian and I are just close friends. Kids these days are smart. They don't twist things in their heads like adults do. I turned my head to her. Because kids are smart, adults should know how to be ashamed of themselves. The smile on Chloe's face stiffened. Julian furrowed his brow. Eleanor, that was a bit harsh. Harsh? I stared straight at him. Every syllable was as cold as ice. The one who is harsh is you. If you want to see me jealous, just send a photo, write a novel, or put on a show in front of my face. Do whatever you want. But dragging your mistress in front of your child? Don't you feel disgusted with yourself? Other parents nearby began to cast sidelong glances. Julian's face changed color, and he lowered his voice. Don't cause a scene here. I scoffed coldly. Since when were you the kind of person who was afraid of a scene? Harrison, who had been in Julian's arms, suddenly grew quiet. The child looked at me, then at his father. That single, small gaze trembling with anxiety brought me sharply to my senses. I could not leave my child standing in the middle of this dirty, humiliating fight. I stepped up to Julian and roughly snatched Harrison away. Harrison, let's go find your teacher on the field. Harrison hugged my neck and asked in a voice as tiny as an ant. Mommy, is that pretty lady Daddy's friend? I stroked my child's hair. Yes, she's an acquaintance of Daddy's. Then is that lady going to play with us too? I hugged my child's back tightly. No, today you're only playing with Mommy and Daddy. Throughout the field day, Julian did not leave our side. As if nothing had happened, he played tug-of-war with me, ran in the relay race, and took pictures with Harrison. At first, Harrison was excited, but as time passed, his smile faded. Every time Chloe waved at Julian from behind the fence, Harrison glanced at me with a face that looked like he wanted to ask something, but he never opened his mouth. On the drive home, Harrison must have been exhausted. As he fell deeply asleep, I thought this agonizing incident would just quietly blow over here. But in the middle of the night, the nanny knocked on my bedroom door, her face pale. Mrs. Harrington, Harrison is burning up with a fever. I ran to my son's room like a madwoman. Curled up in a ball on his bed, his face flushed bright red, Harrison was delirious with fever, muttering nonsense. Mommy, don't go. I don't want a new mommy. My heart plummeted to the floor. I held him tightly, rubbing his back with shaking hands. Harrison. Mommy is right here. I'm not going anywhere. Suffering from the fever, the child gripped my collar tightly and burst into wailing tears. Chloe told me. She said she's going to be my new stepmom. She said Mommy isn't loved by Daddy anymore, so you're going to get kicked out. Mommy, please don't go. Every single word tumbling from my child's mouth felt like a blue-hot dagger plunging into my heart. The patience I had held onto all this time, the calculated compromises, the fortress of cold reason I had solidly built to protect my children's perfect positions, all of it shattered into pieces at the sound of my son's cry. I could tolerate Julian disgusting me, but him and his trashy women scarring my child was something I would absolutely never forgive. I held Harrison until he cried himself to sleep, then stepped out onto the balcony and called my private attorney. My voice was chillingly calm. Prepare the divorce lawsuit. This time, no settlements, no negotiations. The lawyer on the other end of the line fell silent for a few seconds. It was probably because my voice, ringing out in the deep night, was just far too serene. Eleanor, are you absolutely certain? If we actually file the suit this time, the Harrington family side will push back fiercely. I stared out past the balcony glass. The yellow garden lights illuminated the wet leaves below. In this vast estate, there were times I cried until my tears ran dry, times I convinced myself I had to survive while clutching my pregnant belly, and times I learned to swallow every humiliation for the sake of my two children's safety. But the moment Harrison, delirious with fever, cried out in fear of a stepmother taking over, every line of my endurance snapped. I am certain. The divorce petition, full custody of the two children, asset division claims based on the prenup, and all the evidence of Julian's affairs over the last 4 years, bundle it all together and prepare it, make it so flawless and clean that it strangles him without a single loophole to escape. Understood. I will send you the first draft tomorrow morning. I hung up the phone and stood on the balcony for a long time. The night breeze sent chills down my spine, but my heart was colder still. There was no trembling rage like the first time I discovered my husband's betrayal. Now, my anger was like a blade sharpened over years. It didn't flash brilliantly, but it was sharp enough to sever everything in a single strike. 3 days later, Julian came home. It was nearly 9 p.m. when he walked into the living room, still smelling of a stranger's perfume. He probably thought I was going to interrogate him about Chloe, or at least yell at him for not coming to see his sick kid for days. But I sat quietly on the sofa, and on the table in front of me sat a black file folder. Julian took off his watch, placed it on the table, and smirked at me, calling me so urgently, "What's going on?" I slid the folder toward him. "Sign it." He opened the file. The moment his eyes registered the first line, the color instantly drained from his face. Divorce settlement agreement. He snapped his head up and glared at me, unable to believe it. "Eleanor, are you playing a joke on me right now? I don't have time for jokes like this." He snatched up the papers and flipped through them rapidly. As he read down the pages, his complexion turned ashen. It stated that I would take full parental rights and custody of both children, that he could only see them on specified dates, and that without my consent, no woman outside of blood relations could ever approach the kids. Furthermore, it explicitly stated that our individual premarital assets would remain ours. The shares under my name would remain entirely mine, and the assets earmarked for the children would be preserved exactly as stipulated in previous contracts. "You prepared this incredibly well." His voice cracked roughly. "I prepared this 4 years ago. I just finally found a use for it now." Julian glared at me with bloodshot eyes. "Just because of that, Chloe. Just because she said a few words to Harrison, you're going to divorce me?" I let out a hollow laugh. Yet, my chest stung. "Just a few words? Your son burned up with a fever and cried in my arms all night, terrified he'd be kicked out for a new stepmother. To you, is that just a few words?" He flinched. "I didn't know she would say something like that to him." "Of course you didn't, because you never once consider what kind of scars the cheap women you drag around might inflict on others. You only care about my mood, your pathetic ego. You just wanted to test whether I was jealous or not. Julian Harrington, you are garbage as a husband, but you are utterly disqualified as a father." He slammed the folder down onto the table with a loud smack. Papers scattered across the floor. "I told you. I just wanted to see if you still had feelings for me. I swear I never intended to hurt Harrison. Whatever your intention was, the result has already happened." He stepped closer and tried to grab my shoulders. I immediately stepped back and swatted his hands away. At my rejection, he froze in place. "Do you find me that repulsive? Yes?" At that single word, Julian's face went as pale as a sheet. "I loved you, I trusted you, and I thought of you as my home. But you turned that home into a prison where I had to hold my breath, walking on thin ice. And now, you've forced my child to tremble in that dirty terror. I will absolutely never forgive you." Julian dropped his head, leaning both hands on the table. His shoulders trembled minutely. "Eleanor, please, anything but divorce. I'll clean it all up. Chloe, Vanessa, I'll end it all. Let's start over, back home. It's okay if you don't love me. Can't you just stay by my side like before?" I stared quietly at the man in front of me. If I were 24, hearing these words might have shaken my heart. But the me of today was just horribly exhausted. "No." He jerked his head up. "Why? Because I don't want my kids growing up watching their mother forcibly endure their father in a house that's nothing but an empty shell." Julian suddenly picked up the divorce papers from the floor and ripped them to shreds. The sharp sound of tearing paper echoed loudly in the quiet living room. He threw the shredded pieces at my feet, growling with bloodshot eyes. "Don't even dream of divorce. I will never sign. You are my wife for the rest of your life." I looked at the torn scraps on the floor without blinking an eye. "You tore up one copy. I can print 10 more. If you don't sign, we go to trial." He gritted his teeth. "You wouldn't dare." I stared him straight in the eye. "You really think I wouldn't dare?" Right at that moment, the front door opened, and my mother-in-law, Margaret, walked into the living room. She glanced at the shredded divorce papers on the floor, then looked at her son, who had plummeted to rock bottom, with eyes full of extreme disappointment. "How long do you plan to throw these tantrums?" Julian turned around and raised his voice. "Mother, Eleanor says she's divorcing me." Margaret closed her eyes for a second, then opened them, speaking in a voice so cold and resolute it could freeze the entire room. "If I were Eleanor, I would have divorced you too." At her single sentence, Julian turned to stone in the middle of the living room. He looked at his own mother as if she were a total stranger. His eyes were burning red with rage and unfairness. Are you siding with her too, Mother? Slowly, Margaret walked over, bent down, and picked up a piece of the torn divorce paper. She stared at it for a long time before lifting her head. I am not taking anyone's side. I am solely taking the side of my 2 grandchildren. Julian let out a dry, hollow laugh. I am your son. Have you forgotten that I am Harrison and Beatrice's father? He was silenced. The room was so quiet that even the ticking of the wall clock could be heard clearly. Every tick felt like a hammer smashing the shell of hypocrisy Julian had tried so desperately to maintain. Margaret glared at him, her voice turning even colder, like a sheet of ice. When you knelt in front of me years ago, throwing a fit that you had to marry Eleanor, you said you needed no one else in this world but her. But look at you now. You let some filthy woman you meet on the side crash your daughter's first birthday, you boldly bring a mistress to your son's school, and you let an outsider spout nonsense to my own grandson that his mother is going to be kicked out. Julian, on what possible grounds do you expect me to shield you? Julian clenched his fists. The blue veins on the back of his hands popped out. I didn't know Chloe would say that to Harrison. If I knew, I never would have let her near him. I looked at him and spoke flatly. But you're the one who brought her there. He turned to look at me. His gaze was tragically shattered, bordering on despair. Eleanor, I was wrong. I committed a mortal sin. If you want me to kneel and apologize to Harrison, I will. If you want me to end it with all the women outside, I'll end it right now. But please, just bear with this once. I can't live without you. In that moment, I was left speechless. Not because my heart softened, but because my own fate felt so utterly comical. When I used to wail in agonizing pain, unable to breathe, he was out messing around behind my back. Now, when I finally say it doesn't hurt anymore, he clings to me, saying he can't lose me. I spoke. Julian, you're not afraid of losing me. You're terrified of the day I'll treat you like an invisible man, never even glancing at you again. That's what you're afraid of. His face turned white. My mother-in-law let out a short sigh. Julian, enough is enough. If you have even a speck of responsibility left as a father, stop tormenting Eleanor and the children. I refuse. Julian stepped back, his eyes flashing with a sickening stubbornness. I will absolutely not divorce. Assets, shares, custody, I will concede and negotiate everything. But I will never put my stamp on those papers. Eleanor is my wife. I will not allow her to leave my side. I bent down and gathered the torn pieces of the divorce papers one by one. My movements were slow, but my mind was bizarrely tranquil. Whether you allow it or not is no longer important. This marriage rotted away a long time ago. Just as I endured for the kid's sake, I am leaving you now for the kid's sake. Suddenly, Julian lunged at me, trying to snatch the pieces of paper from my hands. Stop it! Margaret's thunderous roar dropped. At the sound, Julian's body halted abruptly. At that moment, standing at the top of the stairs, was Harrison, clutching a stuffed bear. I didn't know when he woke up. Still pale from the lingering fever, the child looked down at us with large eyes paralyzed by fear. Mommy, Daddy, are you fighting? It felt as if my heart was being squeezed tight. I instantly ran to my child and scooped him up. No, nothing's wrong. Harrison, let's go back to sleep. Mommy will tuck you in. Even as Harrison hugged my neck tight, his eyes stayed locked on Julian. Daddy, don't kick Mommy out. I don't want Mommy to go. Julian froze as if he had taken a direct punch to the face. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. Perhaps it was only then that he realized, even if a child's wounds don't bleed, their destructive power is horrific. It was all there in the trembling voice, the wandering eyes, the sheer terror of abandonment planted in a fragile heart by adult irresponsibility. I carried Harrison upstairs to his bedroom and patted his back. Even as he drifted into sleep, Harrison gripped my hand and refused to let go. Looking down at my child's pale face under the nightlight, I stayed awake until dawn. In my heart, there was only one unshakable resolve. No matter the cost, I would pull my 2 children out of this hellish marriage. To our viewers listening to this story, if you wish to support the channel, please hit like and subscribe. We wish health and peace to all who are listening. The next morning, as soon as I arrived at the office, my assistant rushed into my suite, pale-faced. Mrs. Harrington, we have a major problem. Vanessa is down in the first-floor lobby. I put down the pen I was holding. What is she up to now? My assistant swallowed hard. She claims she is pregnant with Mr. Harrington's child, and she brought a swarm of reporters with her. I shot up from my seat. Looking out the glass down to the first-floor lobby, it was already a madhouse. Camera flashes from news crews popped wildly, and amidst the surging wave of people, Vanessa stood, cradling her belly. Her face was pale, but a crazed desperation and venom flashed in her eyes. As soon as she spotted me on the second-floor balcony, she screamed at the top of her lungs, echoing through the lobby. "Eleanor, wasn't stealing my husband enough? Are you going to kill my baby now too?" As her shrieks rang out across the vast lobby, a barrage of camera flashes instantly aimed up at me on the second floor. The shouts of security guards trying to restrain the crowd, the screams of panicked employees, and the murmurs of reporters all tangled together, making it hard to breathe. I looked down over the glass railing at the woman clutching her stomach. She looked noticeably thinner than she had just a few months ago at the birthday gala. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken, and her hair tied back haphazardly. The beige maternity dress was loose on her thin frame, but the way her hands protected her belly made it perfectly clear what weapon she wanted to show the world. My assistant spoke in a trembling voice beside me. "Mrs. Harrington, the security team is trying to escort her out, but there are too many reporters. If they use force, it'll all be caught on video." I issued orders in a cold voice. "Nobody lays a hand on her. Contact the legal and PR teams immediately, and lock down the executive elevators. And call Julian. Tell him to come clean up his own mess." "Yes, right away." My assistant rushed out. I called my mother-in-law. After a brief rundown of the situation, she grasped it immediately. "Do not go down there alone." "No, I have to go down. If I hide, those hyenas will write articles saying I hid because I was guilty." I listened quietly. "Keep this in mind, Eleanor. Do not get into a shouting match with a cornered animal in front of cameras. Just deliver the necessary facts." "Understood, Margaret." I hung up the phone and took the private executive elevator down to the first-floor lobby. During those brief dozens of seconds, I stared at my face reflected on the cold elevator walls. My expression was perfectly composed, but my palms were already drenched in cold sweat. It wasn't because I was afraid of Vanessa. I was terrified that this insane media storm would swallow my children's world whole. I feared that years from now, when Harrison searched his parents' names online, he would read the filthy words the world was spitting out. As the elevator doors opened, reporters swarmed like bees. "Mrs. Harrington, Vanessa claims she was forced to get an abortion. Is this true? Did you know Mr. Harrington had a child out of wedlock?" "There are rumors Harrington Enterprises is trying to buy her silence. What is your statement?" I did not answer. I walked until I was 3 meters away from Vanessa and stopped. Security guards had formed a barricade, but I signaled them to take a half step back. Vanessa's lips trembled as she looked at me. Deep hatred pooled in her eyes. "You finally crawled down here." I looked at her bulging stomach. "Vanessa, if you are truly pregnant, the place you belong is a maternity clinic, not the lobby of someone else's company." She scoffed, then instantly burst into tears. "Are you scared? Are you terrified that when my baby is born, it will steal your children's inheritance? You're afraid that if I give birth to Julian's child, your position will be shaken. You ordered Julian to threaten me and abandon my baby, didn't you?" I answered in an unwavering voice. "I have never contacted you privately, and I have never demanded that you terminate your pregnancy. If you have proof that I threatened you, please submit it to the police or the courts." The reporters began to murmur. Vanessa's face went pale. "Stop acting like a saint. Julian told me everything. He said the Harrington family only recognizes your children as true blood. He said even if I have this baby, it will only be a disgrace to the family. This is all because you control him." The moment I heard those words, a corner of my heart plummeted. It wasn't out of jealousy. It was because the blind delusion of a woman driven to the edge by love was so vividly clear. Lacking even the courage to resent the man who abandoned her, she was firing all her agony and rage at me like arrows. I stared straight into the camera lens right in front of me and spoke clearly. "I am the legal wife of Julian Harrington. Currently, due to the fatal damage my husband has inflicted upon our family, I am in the process of a divorce lawsuit. I hold no responsibility whatsoever regarding the private affairs between my husband and Vanessa. If there is a child, that child rightfully deserves protection under the law and ethics, not to be used as a hostage in the middle of a corporate lobby to pressure my husband and me." Vanessa screamed. "Shut up. You sure talk a good game. You just want to protect the money going to your kids." I looked her straight in the eye. For the first time in my life, an icy chill laced my voice. "That is correct. I want to legally protect what belongs to my children. As a mother, I do not think that is anything to be ashamed of. Right at that moment, the revolving doors of the lobby violently swung open, and Julian sprinted in. His assistant and security guards scrambled behind him. The moment he spotted Vanessa, his face turned a furious shade of blue. "Who told you to come here?" Seeing Julian, Vanessa crumbled from a venomous beast into a pathetic, miserable woman in an instant. "Julian, I had no other choice. You weren't answering my calls, you wouldn't see me. Our baby is already over 4 months along. I just begged you to give us a way to live." Julian gritted his teeth. "Are you insane? You dragged reporters here to ruin everything? You trampled on me first," Vanessa wailed. "How many years did I follow you around? I sacrificed my entire youth, gave up any chance of a proper marriage. Every time I got pregnant, you told me it wasn't the right time and made me erase it. And now, you treat me and my baby like trash and throw us away? Are you even human?" The entire lobby held its breath. The words that exploded in front of dozens of cameras were no different than throwing a brick straight at Julian's face. Pale as a ghost, Julian glanced at me. He was probably hoping I hadn't heard those horrific words. But he didn't realize that I was already so shattered, there weren't even fragments left to break. I instructed the assistant next to me, "Bring a car around to the back entrance, and call a specialized obstetrician immediately. Regardless of the adult situations, we cannot let a pregnant woman collapse on this floor." Vanessa glared at me with hollow eyes. "Stop pretending to be so disgustingly kind," I muttered in a low voice. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for that poor child who never even got the chance to choose its parents." Julian strode forward and roughly grabbed Vanessa's arm. "Come with me." Vanessa struggled. "Where are you taking me? To a hospital again? You're going to force me to erase it again?" Julian did not answer. That heavy silence only made the reporter's camera shutters fire faster. Looking back and forth from Vanessa's pale face to her wrist, turning red under Julian's tight grip, I felt an uncontrollable, ominous premonition creeping up my chest. I warned him in a cold voice. "Julian, dozens of eyes are watching that hand. Are you planning to make things worse right here?" He shot me a bloodshot glare. "Eleanor, I'll handle this. Stay out of it." I stared straight at him and spat out each word clearly. "It's because you always mistakenly think you have the right to treat women like objects and dispose of them however you please, that this disaster happened today." Vanessa suddenly burst into a sorrowful wail. She curled around her belly, slumped onto the cold marble floor, shook her head, and sobbed. "No one pities my baby. No one needs my baby or me." That desperate cry, echoing in the middle of the glittering Harrington lobby, humbled even the onlookers. In that moment, I knew instinctively, this storm would not end as a simple infidelity scandal. It was a fatal event that publicly cracked the center of the massive Harrington empire, and I knew that from today onward, there was no way out for Julian. That afternoon, the video of Vanessa clutching her belly and wailing in the lobby flooded every social media platform and news outlet. Within hours, Julian, my name, and Harrington Enterprises dominated the main pages of every portal site. Some articles painted me as a cold-blooded, calculating wife protecting her assets without a drop of blood or tears, while others meticulously dug into the reckless heir's Playboy antics. That afternoon, Harrington stock plummeted. The PR team moved without a second to breathe. The phone in my office rang incessantly, bringing my assistant to the verge of tears. My father-in-law, who had been hospitalized in the VIP ward, tried to rush out upon hearing the news but complained of chest pains before even getting in the car, and was rushed to the ER. My mother-in-law called me. For the first time, deep exhaustion laced her voice. "Eleanor, come to the hospital. Your father-in-law is asking for you." When I arrived at the hospital, Julian was standing outside the ER. His crumpled shirt, messy hair, and bloodshot eyes spoke volumes of his situation. Seeing me, he licked his lips as if he wanted to say something, but I walked past him, treating him as if he were invisible. There are moments when complete silence cuts much sharper than 100 words of blame. My father-in-law had passed the critical point, but his complexion was as white as paper. Lying in the bed with IV drips, he gestured for everyone to leave as soon as he saw me. My mother-in-law gave me a look, then dragged Julian out of the room. When the door closed, only the steady beep of the heart monitor remained. "Eleanor." My father-in-law's voice wasn't that of the unyielding chairman I knew. He had weakened immensely. "Yes, Edward." He stared at me intently. "You handled the South Boston project exceptionally well. If you hadn't locked down the data at headquarters and pressed the legal and PR teams during this crisis, The company would have faced a riot. I didn't say anything. Compliments like this wouldn't make me happy. I was just tired. He let out a deep sigh. I am sorry. I lifted my head. You have done nothing wrong. No. I knew that boy Julian was rotten early on. But I was like that when I was young too. So I figured men just wander for a bit and eventually return to where they belong. I thought that if you held the position of the legal wife, had kids, and I gave you money, you could cover it up and live decently. I forgot that a woman's heart isn't a warehouse for a man to rest in when he's tired. My throat choked up hot. It was the first genuine truth he had offered me, not as Chairman Harrington, but as my father-in-law. He spoke slowly. If you want a divorce, I won't stop you anymore. But I have a favor to ask. Please, just run the company until the divorce is finalized. Because of my worthless son, I can't just leave thousands of employees out on the street overnight, can I? I looked at the old man in front of me. The formidable man who used to make executives tremble with a single look was now lying in a hospital bed, begging his daughter-in-law to save his company because of his son's incompetence. I will do what I have to do. But I am not staying because of Julian. He closed his eyes and nodded. I know. When I stepped out of the hospital room, Julian was smoking at the end of the hallway. Smoking was strictly prohibited in the hospital, but he seemed to have lost even the barest shred of reason. I walked up to him, snatched the cigarette from his hand, and shoved it into a trash can. If you want to destroy yourself, go roll around in the gutter. What the hell are you doing in front of the room where your father collapsed? He muttered in a hoarse voice. Do you hate the sight of me that much? Yes. At that single word, he let out a smirk. But that smile looked uglier than crying. Vanessa is admitted. The doctor said the shock was too severe, and the fetus is in danger. I didn't know things would escalate this far either. I never know anything. I looked at him, feeling my heart freeze over. He didn't know Vanessa would crash his daughter's party. He didn't know Chloe would say those things to Harrison. He didn't know the media would explode like this. And he didn't know his father would collapse. Julian, just because you are stupid doesn't mean you are absolved of your sins. He shuddered violently, then buried his face in his hands. A long time passed before he spoke. Eleanor, I will clean up the mess with Vanessa perfectly. I promise. I will end this situation no matter what. I looked into his eyes silently. Suddenly, a cold chill ran down my spine. The nuance of his cleaning up didn't mean taking responsibility. It sounded closer to disposing of troublesome garbage. What are you going to do? He avoided my gaze. I'll take care of it tomorrow. I took a step closer and pressed each word firmly. Julian, the child in that woman's belly is innocent. If you force a woman on the edge of a cliff over the side, you will end up digging your own grave. He glared at me with bloodshot eyes. Then what about me? Can't you feel sorry for me just a little bit? You pity her. You pity that brat. You pity your own 2 kids. You pity the company. And you pity my parents. So what about me? I'm about to lose everything. I stood still for a second before answering. No, you didn't lose everything. You threw it all in the trash with your own hands. I left him behind and walked out of the hospital. That night, a torrential downpour slammed Manhattan. The streetlights blurring through the car window flickered like unwashed bloodstains. I didn't know how Julian was going to handle Vanessa, but the ominous feeling inside me snowballed. When a cat mercilessly tramples a cornered mouse, the mouse will inevitably bite the cat's throat. During the 3 days the media storm raged, I essentially lived in my office, setting up a cot. The lights in the 18th floor main conference room didn't turn off well past midnight. The legal team churned out lawsuits and cease and desists, and the PR team desperately filtered out maliciously edited videos and fake news. I wasn't doing this to protect or defend Julian. I was just giving everything I had to stop the massive ship called Harrington Enterprises from sinking due to one individual's infidelity scandal. Because behind that name, thousands of employees, countless partners, and their families had their livelihoods on the line. On the evening of the 4th day, my assistant carefully placed a thin file folder on my desk. Mrs. Harrington, we confirmed that yesterday, Julian took Vanessa to a VIP private maternity clinic on Park Avenue. I snapped my head up. And what happened to her? My assistant's face was ashen. The child was lost. I heard she suffered severe hemorrhaging during the procedure and had to undergo emergency treatment. My finger, which was flipping the page, stopped in midair. Even though I anticipated Julian would commit some cruel act, facing the reality of it sent a crushing weight onto my chest, like a massive boulder. Is Vanessa still at that clinic? Yes. She is still admitted. But Mr. Harrington placed private security guards all over the entrance to her ward. Not even a fly can get in. I closed my eyes for a second. The face of Vanessa, clutching her belly and wailing as if her world had collapsed in the lobby just days ago, flashed in my mind. She was wrong. Invading another family's home was an unforgivable sin from the start. Using an unborn child as a weapon to pressure the legal wife was also a sin. But no matter how heavy her sins were, there was no justification for wiping out a life and throwing her away like trash. That night, I headed to the private clinic on Park Avenue. The hallway of the VIP ward was chillingly quiet. The two bulky security guards guarding the room saw me and panicked, not knowing what to do. Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Harrington ordered that absolutely no one is allowed in. I shot them a cold glare. Call him. One of the guards hastily spoke into his radio. Less than 10 minutes later, Julian appeared at the end of the hall, rushing over frantically. Wearing a black shirt, his face was gaunt, but his eyes flashed with a chilling coldness. Why are you here? I came to see just how brilliantly you cleaned up this mess. Julian furrowed his brow hard. This is none of your business. Right. Who you roll around with, what sweet lies you whisper, who you throw away like garbage, that's none of my business. But if you force a pregnant woman onto an operating table against her will, and try to gag her with money and security guards, this is no longer just your private affair. Julian stepped right up to my face, lowering his voice to a growl. Eleanor, that woman tried to destroy Harrington. She dragged reporters into our lobby and put my father in the hospital. She is absolutely not a victim. Did I ever say she was innocent? I stared straight into his eyes. But just because you act like God doesn't give you the right to cut off someone's lifeline and play the judge, jury, and executioner. He fell silent. Under the cold fluorescent lights of the hallway, his complexion was as pale as a vampire drained of blood. After a long time, he let out a hoarse chuckle. Do you feel sorry for her? No. I feel sorry for the dead child. And I am terrified of you. His smirk vanished. You're afraid of me? Yes. The sheer audacity you have to trample someone like this under the guise of fixing your mistake, and then calling it problem-solving, that terrifies me. The arrogance of thinking you can cover up anything with money terrifies me. Holding Harrison, stroking Beatrice's hair, and then secretly erasing another one of your own bloodlines as if it never existed. Your duality disgusts me and terrifies me. Julian's eyes welled with red, but this time, he didn't get angry. He turned his head away and muttered in a choked voice. Eleanor, I just wanted to protect what I could. No, you just wanted to protect your pride. Right at that moment, a sharp smash times of glass breaking echoed from inside the hospital room. A terrified nurse threw the door open and ran out. Sir, the patient is awake, but she is extremely unstable. Through the crack in the door, I looked inside. Vanessa was sitting up in the bed. Her face was as white as paper, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Shattered glass lay scattered on the floor. When Vanessa spotted Julian standing outside, her eyes ignited like hellfire. Her voice was so cracked it was almost unrecognizable. Where is my baby? Julian stood like a stone statue. Vanessa, leaning on her trembling arms, tried to half stand up. I asked you, where is my baby? No one answered. In truth, all the answers lay within that deafening silence. Vanessa stared at Julian, then spotted me standing outside the door. And suddenly, she burst into maniacal laughter, a bizarre dry cackle. The more she laughed, the more tears fell from her eyes like drops of blood. You said you didn't want our baby to be an illegitimate child. I trusted you. You said just wait a little longer. I trusted that too. I was the biggest idiot in the world. Julian rushed into the room, speaking in a low, urgent voice. Vanessa, calm down. I'll compensate you for everything. I'll give you enough money so you never have to work a day in your life. Vanessa grabbed a pillow and threw it hard at Julian's face. Get out! Her scream ripped through the hospital room. You killed my child, and you talk about compensation? Julian Harrington, you're not even a human being. Standing outside the door, I felt a chill pierce down to my bones. In that moment, I did not see the look of a woman begging for love and being abandoned. I only saw a pitch-black abyss, and within it, a boiling, venomous hatred that swallowed whatever reason she had left. Julian walked out of the room with a grim expression. The door closed. He leaned his back against the cold wall and spoke in an exhausted voice. Time will pass, and everything will be okay. I looked at him and slowly shook my head. No, there are some things in this world that never pass. They just quietly wait for the right timing to rip your throat out. It was near midnight when I finally left the hospital. The night streets of Manhattan, swept by the downpour, were damp and chilling. Looking out the car window at the empty streets, my heart felt as heavy as lead. Vanessa's hollow, spine-chilling laughter kept ringing in my ears. It didn't sound like the wailing of a mother who had lost her child. It sounded like the final gasp of a tightly stretched string of reason snapping. The next morning, I instructed my lawyers to accelerate the divorce proceedings. At the same time, I had them thoroughly review the prenuptial agreement and asset division settlements. Julian and I had signed 4 years ago. Right after his first affair was discovered, out of some shred of guilt, he had agreed to almost every condition I demanded. If we divorced, 100% of the corporate shares under my name would become mine, and both children would have their inheritance rights fully secured in family trust funds. Furthermore, Julian's separate premarital assets would immediately transfer to a legal guardianship fund for Harrison and Beatrice if any fatal incident were to happen to him. When signing the documents back then, Julian smiled bitterly and called me ruthlessly rational. At the time, I thought to myself, I don't need the cheap tears of a man who betrayed me once. I just need an unbreakable fortress so my children and I are never trampled on. That afternoon, my mother-in-law quietly called me to a small conference room. In just a few days, she had visibly aged. Her precise makeup and luxurious silver silk suit remained the same, but the deep fatigue around her eyes couldn't be hidden by powder. Edward has stabilized for now, but the doctors said he absolutely cannot endure another shock. I bowed my head lightly. Yes, I am continuously monitoring the media and calming things down. She stared at me, then lowered her voice. And proceed with the divorce as you wish. I won't try to stop you anymore. I stayed silent for a few seconds before speaking. I ask for one thing. Even if I leave that house with the children later on, you and Edward are always welcome to come see your grandchildren. I have no intention of severing the blood ties between the children and their grandparents. My mother-in-law's eyes reddened. She forced herself to look out the window, clearing her throat. I always knew you were a child with deep affection and a sense of duty. That's why it breaks my heart to realize how unworthy my foolish son is of you. I didn't answer. A compliment given too late doesn't melt the heart. It only scratches the wound. Late that afternoon, Julian came to my office. Instead of barging in like he used to, assuming it was his right, he waited quietly outside, asking the assistant to announce him. That single minor detail showed just how much his arrogant ego had been shattered by the events of the past few days. When I permitted him to enter, he placed a thin envelope on my desk. Vanessa was discharged. She took the apartment and the settlement money I set up for her, and she signed an agreement to leave New York completely. I didn't even look at the envelope. Do you really believe she signed an agreement to just quietly walk away? He bit his lip hard. She signed it. A signature on a piece of paper is only valid when a person is alive, sane, and believes they have somewhere else to go. A stamp doesn't erase a grudge forged in blood. He furrowed his brow. Does it make you feel better to view everything I do in the worst possible light? I raised an eyebrow. It's not that I view it that way. You're the one who always proved it with the worst possible results. His breath caught. He stood frozen like a statue for a long time, before blurting out a single sentence. I will sign the divorce papers. My finger, which was flipping through a document, paused on the desk. What is your condition? He gave a bitter smile with bloodshot eyes. In your eyes, even the way I breathe must look like a transaction now. I didn't answer. Silence is sometimes the cruelest confirmation. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. I'll sign the papers. In return, just give me 1 month. Just 1 month. During that time, let me pick Harrison up from school every day, eat dinner together, hold Beatrice, and let me act like a real father just once. If your heart still hasn't turned back after a month, I'll bring my lawyer and sign the papers right then and there. I stared at him for a long time. Is this a trick to use the kids to hold on to me? No. His voice cracked terribly. I know I don't have the right or the means to hold on to you anymore. It's just, I'm terrified that when the kids grow up, their last memory of me will be of a piece of garbage father. Whether those words were genuine or the desperate ploy of a man on the verge of losing everything, I couldn't tell. But I thought of Harrison and I thought of Beatrice, who knew nothing. Even if our ties as a married couple were severed, I believed the 2 children had the right to at least one piece of a normal memory with their father. Fine. Exactly 1 month. But keep this in mind. If any woman ever comes near my children during that time, this grace period is over instantly. He nodded. His response was as light as a sigh. I know. From that day on, Julian began to change as promised. He picked Harrison up strictly on time, lay on the floor for hours building Legos, and patiently spoon-fed Beatrice. He even clumsily tried to braid his daughter's hair, almost making her cry. Harrison gradually regained his smile. Sometimes he would run to me and whisper, "Mommy, Daddy didn't go out today. He played with me all day." I smiled back, but a corner of my heart always felt as heavy as lead. Belated affection is like the sunset pouring down in the late afternoon. It's beautiful, but it can never stop the pitch-black night from coming. On the 27th night of our promised month, Julian called me. His voice over the phone sounded bizarrely elevated, yet anxious. "Eleanor, Vanessa texted me. She's leaving New York tonight. She asked to see my face one last time." A chill ran down my spine instantly. "Do not go alone." He fell silent for a few seconds, then let out a small laugh. "Are you worried about me right now?" I squeezed my eyes shut. "I'm telling you not to create an annoying scandal just days before you sign the divorce papers." He whispered quietly. "Yeah, I got it." But at 1 a.m., my phone rang loudly. It was my mother-in-law. "Eleanor, come to Mount Sinai Hospital immediately." The voice on the other end of the line was shattered by sobs. "Julian." Something terrible happened to Julian. My mind went completely blank as I drove like a madwoman to the hospital. The streets of Manhattan at 1 a.m. were eerily empty, and the red traffic lights flashing across my windshield looked like long trails of blood. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my nails dug into my palms. I didn't know what I was more afraid of: Julian dying, or my 2 children becoming fatherless orphans after tonight. As soon as I arrived at the ER, I saw my mother-in-law slumped in a hallway chair. Her hair was a mess, her makeup wiped away by tears, and her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't even hold a cup of water. My father-in-law stood beside her with a face as white as paper, looking like an old man who had aged 30 years in a single night. Spotting me, Margaret shot up and grabbed my hands tightly. "Eleanor, the doctors are doing CPR right now. He lost too much blood." Spitting out her final words, Margaret broke down in wails. I supported her and sat her down on the chair. I just stared fixedly at the tightly closed doors of the operating room. There were still distinct bloodstains on the floor that hadn't been wiped away. Just seeing that felt like my heart was freezing over. A plainclothes detective approached me and began asking a few questions. I answered mechanically. When the words "discovered stabbed in a luxury high-rise in Tribeca" and "neighbors scream" and 911 call came out of the detective's mouth, I felt a massive rope tighten around my chest, suffocating me. "What happened to Vanessa?" The detective looked at me. She was arrested at the scene. She also sustained minor stab wounds and is currently hospitalized under custody, showing signs of extreme agitation. I closed my eyes. Ultimately, the very thing I feared most had become reality. The woman who had cried in front of me, begging for love, demanding her rights, and mourning the loss of her unborn child, had finally dragged Julian Harrington with her into the deepest pits of hell. My mother-in-law muttered in a trembling voice. "He said he was just going to say goodbye." I begged him to take the head of security with him, but he insisted on going alone, saying she was packed to leave, and he wanted to keep a final courtesy. "How did things end up like this, Eleanor?" I couldn't answer. A tragedy doesn't just fall from the sky one morning. It is a time bomb built layer by layer from countless dismissals, empty promises, and the arrogant belief that the wounds you inflict are insignificant. By the time you look back, everything has already turned to ashes. 2 hours later, the operating room doors opened. The lead surgeon, wearing scrubs, walked out and pulled down his mask. The moment I saw his eyes, I knew. I am deeply sorry to the family. We did everything we could, but... My mother-in-law screamed and collapsed to the floor. My father-in-law clutched his chest and stumbled. I rushed forward to support Margaret, but my knees gave out and I sank down as well. In that moment, strangely, I didn't cry. It felt as if my tears had frozen into sharp shards of ice deep inside my chest. Julian Harrington was dead. The man who held my hand in the middle of Fifth Avenue on a rainy day. The man who knelt in a room full of roses and proposed. The man who trampled me so ruthlessly, it was hard to breathe. In the end, he met a miserable end on the floor of a stranger's apartment at the hands of the very woman who was supposed to be his most trivial fling. I entered the morgue to see him one last time. His face was bloodless and pale, his eyes firmly shut. His arrogance, his stubbornness, and the regret-filled excuses he poured out too late were all gone without a trace. On his cold wrist, he still wore the couple's watch I had bought him for our first anniversary. The hands of the watch were stopped at 1:17. I stood by his side for a long time, then whispered very softly, "Julian, if only you had stopped just a little sooner." Naturally, there was no answer. As dawn broke, I called home. The nanny answered, half asleep. I gave her strict instructions. Do not give Harrison his iPad, do not turn on the TV, and no adults are to speak a word about this in front of the kids. Hanging up the phone, I stood alone in the corner of the hospital hallway, clutching my phone, entirely lost on how to tell my son this truth. That daddy went far, far away. That the man who used to put you on his shoulders to watch the fireworks would never come back. How do I say it? How do I explain that adult irresponsibility and sin sometimes pour down like acid rain on a child's life, quietly corroding their soul over a long time, even if it isn't immediately visible? That afternoon, the lawyers arrived at the hospital. From that moment on, everything morphed into a bloodless, tearless administrative process. Death certificates, police reports, assets and shares, prenuptial agreements, and my status as the legal guardian of the two children. I listened to all these clauses silently, while my mother-in-law's wails from the next room played in my ears like background music. As stipulated in our existing agreement, the vast majority of Julian's separate premarital assets immediately transferred to the legal guardianship fund for Harrison and Beatrice. Because the children were minors, I became the sole representative with full authority over that fund. Since we hadn't yet stamped the divorce papers, legally, I was still his flawless wife. I, who had been preparing to leave the Harrington family, had within a single night held my husband's funeral and become a widow, commanding massive wealth. When I returned to the estate that night, Harrison ran and hugged my legs. "Mommy, where's Daddy? We promised to go play soccer tomorrow since it's the weekend." I knelt down and hugged my child tight. Breathing in the soft baby powder scent from his body, the tears I had held back finally burst out. "Daddy went very far away, Harrison." The child blinked his clear eyes and looked at my face. "When is he coming back?" I hugged him tighter, my throat choking as I answered, "This time, Daddy can't come back." Harrison stood blankly for a few seconds before bursting into loud wails. The sound of his crying shattered the mask of reason I had put all my strength into wearing all day. Even Beatrice started crying following her brother, and that vast, glamorous Greenwich estate turned into an empty space that chilled me to the bone. Julian's funeral lasted for days. It was held with all the formality fitting Harrington Enterprises' prestige, but the atmosphere was freezing cold. The Harrington family strictly blocked media access, but reporters camped out at the entrance, hiding telephoto lenses and flashing lights whenever visitors appeared. I wore a modest, tailored black dress, my hair neatly pinned back, guarding the wake as the deceased's legal wife. Mourners came endlessly. Some mourned genuinely. Some only showed their faces out of obligation to maintain business ties, and some looked at me with bizarre eyes, desperate to find clues of devastating sorrow, secret joy, or proof that I had ultimately emerged as the final victor in this muddy marriage. But I didn't consider myself a victor. One man was dead, and one woman was a murderer locked behind bars. 2 children lost their father, and elderly parents buried their son. I, too, lost the radiant youth when I believed love could save a person. If this was victory, the price was too cruel, and all that remained was black ash. Harrison wore a tiny black suit, holding my hand tightly. He didn't wail like the first day, but every time someone lit incense before the portrait and murmured, "Oh, the poor child, what a pity," his eyes grew red. Beatrice was too young to understand what death was. Held in the nanny's arms, she would occasionally reach her tiny hands toward her father's memorial photo and babble, "Dada, Dada." Every time she did, my mother-in-law hastily turned her head, swallowing her sobs. Margaret Harrington looked 10 years older in just a few days. The formidable chairman's wife who could suppress executives with a single look was nowhere to be found. Only a hunched woman staring at her son's portrait with hollow, tear-dried eyes remained. On the final night before the burial, after all the guests had left and the room was thick with incense smoke, my mother-in-law sat alone. Julian's smiling photo under the yellow lighting was so familiar, yet terribly foreign. I poured a warm cup of tea and placed it beside her. "Please drink some, Margaret." She didn't lift the cup, just stared at the photo, speaking in a cracked voice. "A long time ago, I lived resenting my father-in-law my whole life. Because he cheated. I always thought, Julian watched my agonizing years growing up, so he would never become a man like his grandfather. But in the end, he went down an even more horrific path. I knelt beside her, but I didn't know how to comfort her. The hell of a mother who has lost a child is a realm others cannot dare to fathom. She turned her head and looked at me. Eleanor, I'm sorry. Not just for what Julian did. I thought if I gave you money, gave you shares, and gave you a seat at the company, it could cover up the hellish betrayal you endured. I lowered my eyes. You didn't force me to endure it, Margaret. It was a path I chose myself. But I stood by and watched your agonizing choice. Her voice trembled violently. I told you before, didn't I? That as long as a man doesn't break the family, whatever he does outside doesn't matter. But now I know in my bones. A house that only runs because a woman swallows tears of blood and forces herself to endure is not a home to begin with. My throat burned. For years, I brainwashed myself into believing I didn't need anyone's understanding or sympathy. But hearing those words from the very person who watched every humiliation I suffered, I felt a tiny crack form in the ice wall I had built so solidly around my heart. My mother-in-law squeezed my hand tight. After the funeral, you may take the children and leave. You may stay in this house if you wish. Do as you please. But Eleanor, I beg of you, please do not leave Harrington Enterprises in this time of crisis. Your father-in-law's health is broken and I am old. The children are still too young. Someone must stand strong as the pillar of this Harrington family for our grandchildren to inherit later, right? I watched the rising incense smoke and stayed silent for a long time. Then I opened my mouth. I will stay at the company. But I refused to do so in the capacity of Julian Harrington's widow. She looked at me. What do you want? Any title or authority given to me must be explicitly in my own name, Eleanor Sinclair. Not as a daughter-in-law, and not as a proxy for my dead husband. I will protect my children's assets and grow the company as much as my abilities allow. But from now on, I want to stand entirely on my own name. Her eyes grew red. Soon, she nodded heavily. I understand. I promise. The next morning, as Julian's casket was being loaded into the hearse, Harrison, who was holding my hand, suddenly pulled away and ran toward the hearse, crying out, "Daddy! Daddy, you haven't taught me soccer yet!" At that desperate cry, everyone at the funeral held their breath for a moment. I quickly ran and hugged my child tight. Harrison clawed at my collar, wailing in a hoarse voice. Mommy said Daddy is never coming back, but I haven't even told Daddy I love him yet. I hugged my child with my entire body, letting the tears streaming down my cheeks fall onto his hair. Daddy heard you, Harrison. He heard everything before he left. The black hearse slowly pulled out of the funeral home entrance. I stood there, holding Harrison with one hand and carrying Beatrice in my other arm. The weight crushing my shoulders was no longer the empty shackle of being a wife. It was the very rest of the lives these two children would live. In that moment, I swore to my bones that I would never fall down again. 1 month after the funeral, a special emergency board meeting for Harrington Enterprises was held. My father-in-law officially stepped down from the front lines of management due to health reasons, and my mother-in-law moved to an honorary chairperson role, and I, Eleanor Sinclair, was officially appointed as the acting CEO of Harrington Enterprises, while simultaneously becoming the sole legal proxy to exercise full authority over Harrison and Beatrice's shares and assets until they came of age. As I opened the doors to the grand boardroom, dozens of eyes that once looked down on me and whispered behind my back instantly locked onto me. But this time, no one dared to call me a trophy wife or a parachute hire. One of the major shareholders stood up and bowed his head respectfully. Welcome, CEO Sinclair. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, sat down, opened the files in front of me, and spoke in an unwavering voice. Let us begin the meeting. In that moment, I realized the hellish narrative of the past had closed, and the true first act of a new life for me and my 2 children had finally begun. 3 months after Julian passed away, I took Harrison and Beatrice and moved out of the massive Greenwich estate. It wasn't because I hated the Harrington family, nor because I wanted to completely sever the past. I simply judged that the children needed a slightly more peaceful, ordinary sunlight to grow up in. The place we moved to was a quiet, detached house in Westchester County. There was a small garden with trumpet vines climbing the fence, a lawn where Harrison could kick his soccer ball to his heart's content, and a wide terrace where Beatrice could play in the morning sun. On the first day of moving in, Harrison stood in the middle of the garden, holding his soccer ball, looked up at me, and asked, "Mommy, does Daddy know about our new house too?" I bent down and brushed the dirt off my child's pants. Of course he does. Daddy will always be watching over Harrison and Beatrice, just in a slightly different way than before. The child stared blankly at the sky for a moment, then nodded bravely. Children do not forget their wounds as quickly as adults assume. They just learn to neatly fold the pain into a corner of their hearts and grow tall, acknowledging it is there. I didn't force my child to be strong. When he missed his dad and wanted to cry, I let him cry all he wanted. When he asked about the past, I only pulled out the gentlest, most filtered memories to answer him. I didn't speak ill of Julian, but I didn't package him as a perfect father either. Adults can be wrong, and they can pay a bitter price for it, but I made absolutely sure he understood that no adult's mistake was ever the children's fault. The workload as CEO of Harrington Enterprises was unimaginably heavy, but as the South Boston project got on track, embezzled and leaked funds within the group were recovered, and toxic clauses in old contracts were completely ripped out and rewritten, the voices doubting me fell dead silent. That didn't mean I had become a woman of steel, with no blood or tears. I was human too, so there were countless nights I came home exhausted, wanting nothing more than to hold the kids and pass out. But every morning, when I saw Harrison heading out the door in his prep school uniform, and Beatrice toddling over to hug me, shouting "Mommy," the reasons I could not stop here were carved into my heart all over again. One late afternoon near the end of the year, I took the two children to visit my in-laws at the Greenwich estate. Margaret came all the way out to the front gates to wait, scooping Beatrice up and kissing her cheeks over and over. Edward stood behind them, leaning on a cane. His hair had gone entirely white, but his eyes looked more peaceful than ever before in the past. After dinner, Margaret handed me a thick envelope. This is the finalized deed of share transfer for Harrison and Beatrice. Edward and I have legally finalized everything. Now, no one can lay a single finger on these children's rights. Taking the envelope with both hands, a corner of my heart swelled with emotion. Thank you, Edward, Margaret. My mother-in-law affectionately held my hand. Rather, we should be thanking you. If it weren't for you, this family would have dissolved into thin air a long time ago. I looked out the living room window. In the snow-covered garden, Harrison was playing with Beatrice, tossing snowballs for her. The sound of the two children laughing merrily under the winter sunlight was so clear and transparent that the tip of my nose stung. There was a time when I thought that after my husband's betrayal, all that remained in my life were cold calculations, stock shares, icy contracts, and scars that would never heal. But even upon burnt ashes, human beings are creatures capable of cultivating a new garden. Though it might not be as dazzling as the fairy tale flower beds I first dreamed of, it was a sturdy fortress where my children and I could lay our bodies down warmly and live. That night on the drive home, Harrison spoke up from his car seat in the back. "Mommy, I'm going to grow up fast. When I'm an adult, I'll protect you and Beatrice." Looking at my son's face through the rearview mirror, I smiled softly. "You don't have to grow up fast, Harrison. You can just keep playing and having fun, and grow up strong like you are now. Mommy can protect us just fine on her own." The streetlights glided past the car windows, and the two children in the back drifted into a peaceful, quiet sleep. I turned the radio volume down very low. Having passed through countless storms, my heart was calmer than ever. I was no longer the poor college student who trembled shyly at a boyfriend's bouquet, nor the betrayed wife who wailed in a locked room until her tears ran dry, nor the Harrington trophy wife who lived holding her breath, leaning on her wealthy husband's background. I was Eleanor Sinclair, mother to Harrison and Beatrice, and an independent woman who stood tall on her own 2 feet, even climbing out from the abyss of betrayal, scars, and agonizing loss. This story is a breathtaking family drama, capturing the awakening and growth of a woman who overcomes betrayal, infidelity, assets, and deep scars. It showcased the journey of a wife, Eleanor Sinclair, suffering from her husband's changing heart, as she protected herself and her children, and reclaimed her true worth. This tale reminds us that while love is important in a marriage, self-esteem, responsibility, and above all, protecting the peaceful lives of one's children are equally paramount. Even a woman who once crumbled because of love can pioneer her own happiness, stronger and more independently than anyone else, if she faces the truth and stands up. This narrative is a work of fiction reconstructed based on fragments of various human emotions, and it was produced with an AI voice to convey meaningful life lessons to our viewers. The characters are unrelated to any specific real-life individuals. We hope our viewers resonate with the fact that the most important thing in life is knowing how to correctly love oneself. When deeply wounded, we have the right to hurt and shed tears, but we must never be buried by that agony and lose the direction of our lives. A marriage that lasts requires loyalty, responsibility, and respect for one another. And as parents, please do not drag your children into the shameful mistakes and faults of adults. The clear world of children must be protected with healthy and proper love. This goes for both women and men. Do not bet your entire life on the empty vows of someone who cannot even take responsibility for their own. Face life with an unshakable, awakened mind. Boldly cut off toxic relationships. Care for your family, protect your self-esteem, and build a peaceful life through your own abilities.